the bounty hunters. "Girls, we need to calm ourselves down. Yes, those new bounty hunters are in the area, but this is a safe place. We're not known to operate here. We don't have a bounty here. Thryken explains with her hands up to calm her crew. Her voice is a whisper that those standing next to her would have to strain to hear if she were not a fossa and with ears sensitive enough to catch not only a whisper that quiet, but its echo as well. Yes, there are high-profile bounty hunters here, and everyone has seen the terrifying footage of a single Tret-looking lunatic going on a complete and total rampage through the Gilded Gold Casino. Of course, the part that scared her was that he hadn't stopped when he lost an eye. He was still lethal when down an arm. Then he got them replaced and seemed to go from dangerous but mortal to straight-out untouchable. This is an unknown safe house. We have new identities here, and with a touch of Axiom flesh molding are new people. It would take a DNA scan to even tell who they were, and those machines were not subtle. On the opposite side of the wall, Bike adjusts the settings on the massively powerful DNA scanner and compares it to the files on record. He glances back at the rest of the team and gives them a vicious grin that can only be seen by the crinkling of his eyes, followed by a short nod. All the men are in full combat gear and new communicators which link into the system sitting next to the DNA scanner and a powerful microphone pointing directly into the criminal safe house. All of it is Bike's responsibility. Pukey returns the nod before gesturing to Itchy, Dong, and Mustard. He indicates upwards above the room and then clenches his fist before spreading his fingers almost violently. He then taps himself on the chest and holds out his fist with the thumb up, which then descends to touch his index finger. Itchy nods and picks up a case before slinking out of the room, followed by the other two. They roll their steps to keep them utterly silent. Bike holds up a screen with a transcript of all relevant information being said in the conversation so far, and after scanning it, Pukey hands it back. He then gestures to both Tang and J3 before indicating to the left and right. He then holds his palm flat and perpendicular to the floor and presses down somewhat. Both men nod and pick up the cases with their broken-down rifles before slipping out of the tiny rented apartment just as silently as Itchy had. "Look, all I'm saying is that skill is skill and rumor is rumor. Our bounties don't extend here, meaning they've got nothing on us in this system," Thryken says. "But boss, Nudie has long been friendly with the Zahn system. It won't take much for our bounties to transfer over. I'm just worried, see?" Litty protests, and Thryken scoffs at the weakness of the new blood in her little gang. Silly little girl hasn't even killed someone with their own scream of pain yet. "You let me do the worrying. You just get to scouting the local hospitals so we can get some merchandise to sell. Groomers pay top dollar for newborn boys. But then our bounty will follow us," the annoying worrier protests. "Not us. I made sure our faces and bodies were molded to fit some local girls. They'll take the rap for us, and by the time anyone knows which way is what, we'll be long gone with the pay dirt," Thryken says with a vicious smile. "See? The boss knows her stuff." On the other side of the wall, Bike passes Pukey the transcript, and despite most of his face being hidden by the bandana, it's clear the man is baring his teeth in fury. He hands it back and gestures to Airfarce. He indicates straight up, and the pilot nods before slinking out with all the clamor of a shadow. He then taps Bike on the shoulder and gives him a nod. The communications officer and technician begins moving things to the side, taking heavy advantage that he put everything down on padded blankets for just this. They slide over as a large, braced metal panel with pre-prepared charges on one side is silently moved up to the wall and prepped. They then remove part of it from the blanket, so that a pair of partially jammed wheels to rest on the floor. Bike quickly puts everything under armored blankets to protect the equipment, as the Hat and Mr. T quickly get their weapons ready. Bike does the same with an automatic shotgun that he checks, then nods. "All I'm saying is that we have to be careful and—" Litty protests, as the wall behind them and the roof both explode at once. The sound hits as hard, if not harder, than the actual shockwave and drops everyone in the room. "We're under—" Thryken begins as she rises before a blast of sound and light far worse than the bomb, and everyone goes blind and deaf at once. Something heavy slams into her and takes her to the floor before her arms are wrenched behind her back and cuffed. Her senses swim, and after a few moments she has nothing but spots in her eyes before a bandana is tied around them and a muzzle forced into her mouth. She's marched through the building. Her every attempt to thrash or fight is met with a brutal hit to her side or gut before she's forced into something and locked down. She can hear Letty whimpering in terror, as well as she can hear everyone dragged in and chained down. Who the hell is this? How did they do this? What was that horrible banging flash weapon? She tilts her ears to try and get a hang of things. Whoever these people are, they've made a clean sweep. All 7 of her girls are in here with her. There are more of them than there are of her girls, and they're in an air van. Though that last one is obvious. Nothing. They're not saying anything. There's some slight tapping which lets her know they're very aware of her earlier exploits in audio-recorded blackmail and her skill at hearing things, so they've given her nothing to work with. There's a wait as some equipment is stashed away and weapons are checked. Not that they needed to be used. The fight was over before it even began. The air van takes off and they soar through the air. She has no idea how high, so she does not dare wreck the vehicle to try and get an escape. The sounds of traffic are passing by faster than normal. They're sharper and more keen. The pilot is reckless and speeding by a far from insignificant margin. The play of wind is faster than usual, and she can hear a few bugs splatter against the windshield. The sound of the road makes her grin, though. There's chatter outside. If they're bringing her and her girls to a bounty station, then they're in for a nasty surprise. Not only is the bounty not in this system, but the flesh molding needs DNA scans to get around. Something your average police station can't use without a permit and is too finicky for the average team to toy with. One of the members hops out of the air van after it comes to a stop, and there is no conversation. No contact, nothing at all. There's the sound of something grinding and a deep exhale. The vents turn on and the acrid smell of smoke fills her nostrils. A noise of rubbing metal and a hollow sloshing liquid and a loud swallow. A drink is being had. Paper rustles. Someone is reading a book. Several of her gang members whimper and she growls to establish control. When she gets out of this mess, they're going to pay with their lives for this indignity. They will pay. A nearby door opens and there's a gasp. "My goodness! Are you certain?" A woman asks, slight flutter in her voice, a bare hint of a Meccan accent, middle-aged or feigning maturity. "Completely. Here are our scans with a copy of the documentation. Be careful. She's listening," a synthetic voice says. Whoever spoke wasn't here. It was transferred through a speaker. This person is clever. She can't affect his meat if he's whispering through a speaker. It sounded vaguely male, though. She focuses, and there's the sound of tortured metal and sparks. The gasp with the slight Meccan touch has more to work with, and the woman screams in pain. She focuses her axiom further, and the sound creates a feedback loop that is quickly rewarded with the sound of a scream. Then there's a brutal blow to her head, and she slumps in her seat. Everything swims, and all sounds fade away as her first escape attempts earns only a beating. She awakens in a cell alone. The gag, the blindfold, and the cuffs are gone. How did this even happen? How was she found out? How did all her plans come crashing down so quickly? She puts her head to the nearest wall and flattens her ear against it. Most fossa would use earplugs or headphones to filter out the sound from their powerful ears, but she knew how to use them, knew how to make them into weapons. She focuses hard. "Thryken Scheinpelt, you have been positively identified and contained despite your flesh-molding techniques and impersonation. You will be held for—" The voice in the speaker she's ignoring says before she finishes focusing axiom to empower the tiny sounds of the building's vibrations to tear it apart. "Ah, sonic vibration, my inspiration to annihilation." She purrs as the echoes allow her to pummel her own cell open like a fragile nut, and she saunters out. She's on the top of her game as she rips this petty prison apart, the sound letting her know where everything in the building is and tear it to pieces. "Girls, we've been backstabbed. I don't know what kind of hunter found us, but I'll be personally tearing them apart and feeding the giblets to the insects," she assures her crew, who look up at her as the goddess of war that she is. "Thryken!" Letty screams, pointing, and she turns. There's a skull-decorated figure throwing some black object towards her. Where had they come from? She heard nothing. The device erupts in sound and light and drives her to her knees with a scream of pain. A blow like a hammer fall slams into her head and she barely holds on to consciousness. Then another two follow it and she's out again. She awakens to a dulled world with a suppressor helmet on. Her fingers fly over it to try and find some kind of way to peel it off. There's nothing. No way to peel it off. The wall to her left has a panel that lights up and the words make her freeze. The helmet is a bomb. If she breaks it with her axiom abilities, she dies. If she disables it, she dies. If it's opened incorrectly, she dies. Who was that black-clad figure? What was that device they used on her? How did they find her? Just how? On the chain breaker. Gregory Pukey Schmidt typed out his report in a calm and steady manner. Operation Mime Time had gone off flawlessly with the capture of the FOSA exclusive gang of slavers, kidnappers, and mass murderesses known as the Sonic Slayers by the local medias had been a complete success in spite of their near-successful escape attempt after incarceration. The massively audio-sensitive gang had required complete silence to deal with properly, but everything had occurred flawlessly. Flashbangs had been almost absurdly useful against the entire group, but to see that sonic-based axiom destruction up close and personal would have been disquieting if he hadn't had a sound, baffling mask under his bandana and been utterly silent already. The bounty had been comparatively small at 100,000 credits per person, with a full million for the boss Thryken Shinepelt, but it had been an excellent test run against further FOSA targets. Perhaps something that could have been used against that Karen Darkdown character that had been a guest aboard the Dauntless. "You boys are absolute goofballs," Cindy says, walking into the little office where he and his men would write reports. He turns with a smile but quirks an eyebrow in question. "You too? I mean, it's not the worst competition, but really? A contest as to who can be utterly quiet the longest? That's just silly." She berates him and he shrugs with a grin. "Not even for me? Nothing to say to me?" She demands hands on her hips. His response is to pick her up and kiss her deeply. "Oh, you goof." She chides him, and he gives her a little nod before sitting back down and cuddling her into his lap as he types out the rest of the report with one hand.